Final Fantasy X is one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful entries in its beloved series. This game marks a departure from many of the series' staples. The beautiful hand-drawn backgrounds, the ATB system, and the more character-focused narratives of past Final Fantasies were replaced with a new style of game. That isn't to say that Final Fantasy X is worse than the Final Fantasies of the past, or better for that matter. It's just different. Although it is far from perfect, the game's story and characters have captivated countless gamers across the globe, and with very good reason. It is undoubtedly a good game, and it contains one of the deepest and most unique settings I've ever seen. One that has so many layers to it and so much depth. Final Fantasy X is a great game, but also a flawed one. I mean, I still have nightmares about those awful Cloister of Trials sequences. Due to its flaws, Final Fantasy X does get its fair share of scorn, and a lot of this criticism is focused on one man, our main protagonist, Tidus. Before I go any farther, let me state my opinion on Tidus. I don't particularly like him, and I think that Square Enix flubbed on a good few aspects of his character, such as voice acting and dialogue. However, I do think that he is well written conceptually. He's a narrative tool that the plot, characters, and setting needed for this game to work. He tends to be a love him or hate him character from what I've gathered, so naturally I'll take my seat on the fence. I don't love the guy, and I don't think that he was the hero of Final Fantasy X. His father reserves that right in my eyes. But I can more than understand why he was necessary, and he totally fulfilled his role, although it could have been done better. Tidus is flawed. He's selfish, stubborn, childish, narrow-minded, downright stupid, and I was not a fan of the blunt and dull direction they went with his voice acting. But the story of Final Fantasy X needed this man's childishness and boneheadedness for a multitude of reasons. Within a very small amount of playtime, the player and Tidus are plunged into a foreign world, Spira. Now, Spira is exceptional as far as settings go. The entirety of life in this land revolves around sin for the citizens. Avoiding sin, rebuilding after an attack from sin, practicing their faith to atone for sins long past which they didn't even commit, and simply trying to live as worthwhile a life as this brutal setting will allow. Not only this, but this new world is a setting that is entirely unique to the player. Admittedly a characteristic that comes up every time a player boots up a new game. So, Spira is entirely foreign to the player, both societally and geographically. The key here is that it is also entirely foreign to Tidus as well. We're new to the setting, and he's new to the setting. We can relate to his feelings, he is as curious as we are. For instance, when Seymour remarks that Auron has the scent of the far plane on him, Tidus quite literally sniffs him. On a more serious and sad note, he is the only one in the party that, upon hearing that Seymour has proposed to Yuna, is primarily concerned with whether Yuna truly loves or even likes Seymour. Through Tidus, we learn that things like love are secondary at best and have very little place in Spira. He is always wondering, always asking questions to the world's inhabitants, despite their astonishment at his ignorance. This is very useful to the narrative and to the knowledge of the player. In an organic way, we learn about this new world and setting as Tidus learns. He asks all of the vital questions as it is his nature to be oblivious. This is a natural and non-expository way for the game to approach world building. We start from the ground up and learn about Spira as time goes on, and as certain facets are exposed to our protagonist. Through questions asked by Tidus, we subconsciously develop a sense of how tragic and deep this world is, aided by Final Fantasy X's many characters who have different and interesting views on the world. This style of world building is essential for the player to truly grasp the gravity and tragedy of Spira, and become invested in its fate. Tidus is an interesting personality, to say the least. He's certainly not boring, that's for sure. He's enthusiastic, good-hearted, determined, and spirited, but at the same time can be stupid, irritating, blunt, and rash. The most important thing about Tidus, however, and the reason that he works as a protagonist for this story, is that he is incredibly childish and stubborn. This is absolutely vital for the narrative of Final Fantasy X to work, and a character like Tidus needed to be in this story, and this setting, for Sin to finally be destroyed. Allow me to explain. Spira is literally a spiral of misery. Sin always comes in and destroys any given island or village at least once every 5 to 10 years. Nothing substantial can ever be built sociologically because the citizens of Spira only ever have time to recover from Sin's last attack before another one comes in. Society is built around Sin, as I have said before. Culture is rooted in the foundation of Sin. Religious doctrines and cults like Yevon are relied upon as a means to provide a hope that somehow, someday, after a gigantic amount of atonement, Sin will leave. Yevon's teachings are ridiculous. The religion essentially gives a template for how to live life. Do this, do that, don't think for yourself. This is the correct way to live because we say so. And due to this setting, Spira as a whole listens to these teachings and have embedded them in their culture because these people will cling to the tiniest shred of hope that they have access to. Things like Machina and the Al Bhed are targets for blame because humans always need something to blame. Yet Sin never leaves. Hatred of Machina and the Al Bhed will not solve anything. And some people like Maester Micah are simply going through the motions, while others like Seymour are driven to insanity and madness through their warped ideals based on Sin. Important characters like Wakka have their ideals crumble before them in this narrative, while others like Lulu are stewing in sadness. It is a constant miserable monotony, and it could be argued that in this setting, the lucky ones are the ones who die in the Sin attacks. So, due to this monotony, the characters in Spira have submitted. Nothing has ever worked in the past to combat Sin permanently, and they think nothing will ever work in the future. They have acquired a sort of learned helplessness with regards to their fate. And not just one or two people, but nearly everyone in the entire setting. The Summoners and Guardians set out to destroy Sin, but they know that at best they can only delay Sin. They never harbor any ambitions of eliminating it forever. The sacrifice to make an individual into the final Aeon has a dire consequence, but the truth is that it is meaningless, inconsequential, and insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The calm that follows is always brutally short, and Sin is always reborn through you, Yevon. Yet many summoners have gone through with the ritual regardless, to play their roles. Summoners bring a baseless hope that keeps Spira calm and in relatively high spirits, but that hope soon evaporates. Nothing ever changes, and despite small periods where some can dare to hope, it seems like nothing ever will. There is a sense of tragic inevitability everywhere, and people find solace and hide using things like blitzball and faith, because any distraction is a welcome one. Narratively speaking, everyone in this setting thinks in the same defeatist way, and that is where Tidus comes in. There is a stark contrast between Tidus and everyone else in Spira. He thinks in a mindset that is polar opposite to the defeatism of these inhabitants, and this attitude mixed in with his childish and stubborn nature is the perfect recipe for a change in this setting. Spira's inhabitants reject the Al Bhed and Machina while constantly praying to Yevon in blind faith. Once in a while, a summoner attempts a pilgrimage, maybe even stops Sin, but then Sin returns after a few years. This has been repeated for years upon years, so much so that it has become trivial. Pray for forgiveness, listen to Yevon, Sin attack, rebuild society. Pray for forgiveness, listen to Yevon, Sin attack, rebuild society. Tidus comes in and breaks this cycle for everyone he comes in contact with. What did the Albed do? What are they doing now? Why mindlessly trust Yevon? Why mindlessly trust a man just because he's a maester? Why are you all paying with your lives as atonement for sins you didn't even commit? Why do we have to allow Yuna to sacrifice herself? Isn't there another way? When inhabitants of Spira look down, Tidus looks up. When they ask why, what's the point? Tidus says, why not? You've got to try. He questions everything about this setting, which leads to quite a bit of self-reflection for some of these characters. The world is stagnant and treading water in misery, and Tidus and his entirely foreign mindset breaks that cycle. Slowly but surely, Tidus' fierce point of view with regards to Yevon and attitude rubs off on Yuna and her guardians, and genuine hope for a fresh start rears itself in the narrative. Tidus has everyone questioning how and why they've been living their lives a certain way, and offers a fresh and foreign perspective. This changes everything, and this was all set in motion through Auron and Jecht, who knew that Tidus' determination could be the key to end this suffering. This is why Auron always encourages Tidus to trust his instincts, follow his own path, and make decisions for himself. The true turning point and climax of the story in terms of truly reversing the party's outlook on Yevon is after the revelation with Yunalesca, but this is only possible through Tidus' ability to have these people question how they've been living their whole lives, and aided by Auron and Jecht. Tidus may be irritating and boneheaded, but at least this aspect of his character was put to proper use in the story of Final Fantasy X. Tidus does get some hate, and some of it is indeed justified, but I think that some people unfairly overlook how important he is as a balancer and a driving force for the narrative. I really like Final Fantasy X. While it is actually my least favorite of the 5 Final Fantasies that I've played, its strengths definitely outweigh the weaknesses. The setting is nothing short of spectacular, the dark and sorrowful themes hit home, and the story as a whole is a special one about overcoming the odds, perseverance, and breaking the cycle of suffering. A lot of the story's development hinges on the shoulders of its protagonist. Is he perfect? Definitely not, far from it. But he has plenty of good moments as well. His eternal search throughout the game for a home that he would never return to was deeply thematic and resonated with me. His reluctance to abide by the rules that Spira had seemingly picked out for its inhabitants was admittedly pretty great. Also, his final scene where he dissipates into fireflies in front of Yuna was nothing short of phenomenal. So although Tidus does contribute to plenty of the game's flaws, he was a character and a narrative tool that the game and setting needed to break Spira out of its miserable monotony.